Hello, Joseph here from clarionclavier.com, here today to bring you a tutorial or a lesson or an introduction on the first piece from Burgmuller's Opus 100 collection. This is Sincerity, and I'll play a short little excerpt so you can get an idea of which one I'm talking about. So this piece is really accessible for beginners or people that are just, maybe have played a level or two of many of the method books out there. And it's a good one to kind of move out of the method books with because it's still 5-finger position based, but it has a couple of other more impressive runs, and I think it's a very satisfying yet very accessible piece of music. It's only 2 pages. The edition I'm using is the Schirmer Performance Edition, which has editorial remarks and performance notes and little biographical information, as well as really spread out text with a nice sepia color to it. Solid, no nonsense fingerings. I really do enjoy this edition. However, I will also link to the public domain edition. So my approach with a piece like this, or really with any piece, is to tackle the more difficult sections first, to isolate them, show you what they are, break them down for you, and kind of help you normalize them so that when you start running through the piece from the beginning, you can just kind of set these more difficult sections into the music and it flows a lot better. With that said, I'll go ahead and switch over the camera view and begin the tutorial. The first reasonably difficult measure in this is going to be measure 7, and that's just because of the shape of the left-hand chord. So normally in this piece we just have, easy primary chords that you see in the method books, but then we have this D7 chord right here in measure 7. We have a D, an F sharp, and a C. So the outer interval is a 7th, and then if you relax your hand on the 7th, your third finger should fall on the F sharp, and it should be a pretty comfortable chord. Here is what this measure actually sounds like. And then I'll play the next measure for continuity. So the left hand, you want to kind of plot this out. You have your D7 chord into G major. And in order to feel what the right hand's going to do, you can count it out loud on the left hand. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and don't forget about the rest. The right hand will go like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you put them together. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, once you've learned this, you want to learn the measure before, which is measure 6, so that you can lead into it. You're going to go from a C major triad to this D7 chord. So the outer interval of a 5th here to an outer interval of a 7th. That's what you want to practice getting comfortable with. Then you can start dropping in the middle note. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now on the right hand we start on an F, we just have a downward pattern. And then we're going to cross right at the beginning of measure 7 and fill out our 5-finger pattern. So I'll play this slowly because this is actually what's tricky. You have a chord that maybe you're not expecting on the left hand at the same time that the right hand has to cross for the first time, and it can just be a little tricky at first. So here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So technically you're starting out in measure 6 in a C position with finger 4 and F. And then in measure 7, you've moved to a G position. So C position, you're going to bring the 3 over, and now you're in G position. So get comfortable with that, counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, nice and fluid, and you can put them together. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, the next difficult section is measure 13, 14, 15, and 16. So each of these measures really needs to be kind of tackled on their own. So I'll start with number 13 since it's the one, it looks harder than it is, but it's pretty easy. Notice that you have a a half note on top, a G, and then an eighth rest directly below that. And then we have an E flat. And so a lot of students will think to hold the half note for, a half note value and then start the other part. But realistically, this is actually two voices stacked on top of each other. If you could imagine like a soprano alto type of thing, the sopranos come in on beat 1 and the altos are going to come in on the end of 1. And the sopranos are going to hold the whole time. So this figure is actually going to be a C minor triad here, and it'll look like this: 1 and 2 and, while you're holding the G still. Then you're going to move to the F sharp and you're going to repeat the other notes: 3 and 4 and. So once you get this figure, you want to make this top voice kind of carry over into the next, the G carry over into the F sharp. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And then you can just simply add the left hand to that. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Don't forget to re-articulate this A when you play the chord. So many of my students don't do that re-articulation. They just kind of add the C. So you need to re-articulate the chord. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And then the next part, so this is measure 14, is going to be, well, the best way to think of this is 4 sets of 2. So that's the first set, second, third, fourth. So your hand's going to shift pretty much each time. So we have A, G, think of it in sets of 2, C, D, F, E, G, A. And you try to get a little more continuous with it. And here's your quarter note pulse. 1, 2, 3, 4. I actually find that it's helpful to learn this in groups of 2, and you can kind of play the 2 notes a little faster than the tempo and then pause, give yourself a chance to process the next part so you don't make any mistakes. So you'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you can combine 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can combine into a larger group. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm making it look easy, but it really does. It takes a loose hand to kind of, sort of inchworm your way around the keyboard here. And I'd say this is probably the most uncomfortable measure in the piece for beginners. And then you have a inverted C chord in the bass. And that's pretty much it. It's not too tough once you figure out. You really need to memorize this little run. It's very easy, so you don't have to look at the music because you'll need to look at your hand here. So, and then in measure 15, we pick it up. We continue on the C. Now this addition in the third beat, in the end of the third beat, we have a 2 where you would normally expect a 3. So this actually shifts the hand up into an A position. So we start in a G position, then we shift to an A position, which makes this a little bit more fluid. So many editions don't have this specific fingering, but I do recommend it. So the fingering would go on this measure: 4, 3, 1, 2, 4, 2, 5, 4, 3. It's as simple as that. It's not too challenging. On the left hand, notice that you have a treble clef there. So we have a little bit of ledger line reading, but I'll go ahead and tell you what it is. It's a G below middle C, and then a 7th above that. So it's basically a G7 minus the other notes, which are picked up in the right hand anyway. So the important thing to note here is where you're coming from. So go back to the previous measure, measure 14. You have this chord, G, C, E. So count through 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, like so. So if the outer interval of the previous chord is a 6th, all you're doing is just going up 1 note and you're dropping the middle note. You're just leaving it out. And so on. And then finally in measure 16, you bring your hand up to a C position and close it out like that. The next thing we'll do is put the hands together here on measure 15. Bring measure 16 into it and getting comfortable with that. After you've done that, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, then you can add add in measure 14. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And if you need to do this, and wait for a second while you figure out what you're doing next, that's fine so long as you practice with the intent of decreasing that space to where there's not a space anymore. The whole run looks like this, from 13 to 16. And in this edition, there's instructions to basically slow down towards the end of measure 15, which gives you a little bit more grace in handling that section, kind of doing a reset. Then it returns to an easier section that you've already repeated. So the last difficult part is the ending. And that's coming from measure 23 to measure 24. You have that figure where you have the 4-2. 4-2 right there. So 4-3-1-2, 4-2, 5-4-3. So this is where we're going to actually turn our hand and continue. So it starts, so here's the beginning of measure 24. It starts with 3 on C, 2 on B, and then now you're in a 5-finger C major position. 3, 2, 5-finger position. Once you recognize that pattern, it's pretty easy. You'll shift your hand for this part. Measure 25. Measure 26, bring your 3 back to the C. And then shift. And that's pretty much it for that. So that's not too difficult. You just have to train it and get comfortable with it. Once again, I think groups of 2 are helpful. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you can subdivide like I was doing earlier. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. Okay, so let's look at the left hand for a second. In measure 24, we have a C chord, which really just C. Then we have a half rest, which most people don't think to observe the first time through, and you need to observe that half rest because first, it's written, and second, because you need time to prepare this next chord, which is an F minor inverted chord. So, you'll play 1 and 2 and then the second you say 3, you hit the third pulse, you'll shift into this F minor chord. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and you will go in because your thumb's short and you'll need to put the thumb on a black key, so you have to reach in to actually play this chord. So you're going to be moving probably from this position to this position. So that's something that just kind of needs to be rehearsed a little bit. And then from there, you're just doing C major. That's pretty close. And then you move on to the end. So putting the hands together, I'll go nice and slow so you can choreograph this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Here's the shifting of the 3 right here. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Shifting again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and so on. So that's it for the difficult measure. So I would practice those first. Here's an example of what that sort of thing could look like. You train it to get to the point where you're starting at measure 6, 7, and 8, right when you begin playing the piece. And you'd rep that a few times, and then you go over to measure 13. And you'd rep that a few times, and you go down to measure 24. That's it. So those are the difficult parts, and the rest, if you can handle those, the rest of the piece is actually pretty easy. So I'll walk you through the rest of the piece really quickly once you feel like you've conquered those more difficult sections. So right in the beginning of the piece, on measure 1, we start in a C position, and then we shift up to an F position, and then back to a C position. Note that there's a crossover here, an extension. And then there's a third here. So here, measure 3, G, E, D, C, B, C, E, F. Note your intervals here. Third, second, 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 third, second. And then the next measure has some of that changed. See, now it's all stepwise. So once you get the hang of that, you can bring the left hand in, and the left hand is just the C chord. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. I should have mentioned that you want to learn the left hand first to really get an idea of the shapes. I assume that by the time you're at a piece like this, you recognize these shapes. But if you don't recognize the shapes, we can talk about this. So first measure is a C triad, just basic 5-figure, 5 through 1. Then we have our Roman numeral 4 chord, which in this case is an F chord. It's an inverted chord. And this is just a very smooth way to get to an F chord from a C chord. So it's pretty common, and it's always done with 5-2-1 like this. And then back to 5 through 1. Then you have your 5-7. Once again, for smooth voice leading, this is a really accessible way to get to this kind of chord. So it's very common for that reason. And then you have your D7 chord, as I mentioned earlier, and then a resolving. So once you have the shape, I would try to count the left hand out using the 8th note, so you can feel the sense of the right hand while you're playing the left hand. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. On the right hand, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and both hands a little slower. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. And that's the end of the first section. The next section is going to start in basically a B position and a G position. And they're just going to be doing these kind of inverses, 5, 3, 2, 1 on both hands. This is pretty easy. Then you have a chord with a left hand taken over. Same thing. And then same thing earlier. So I'll show you what that looks like. The right hand's just doing this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and left hand. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and then both hands. Then we have our measure 13 through 16, which we already talked about. And then in 17 through 20, that's another copy of this section. And so on. So, and then in 21, you have another copy of measure 13. So, or, it's the same material repeated. Then really that just leaves the ending. So actually, I'll go from 27 to show you what this looks like first. That's tricky here is getting the different inversions of the chords. So this is the GCE chord, second inversion triad, in measure 29. So outer interval of a sixth, G to E, and then a half rest. And then once again, outer interval of a sixth, E, C, with no middle note. So just getting comfortable with those shapes and resting in between, that is really key because you kind of have to reset your hand a little bit to move it around. On the left hand, you're coming from middle C, C chord, and then you're moving down an octave. Then you have your first chord, then you're holding this final note and playing the rest of the chord. And so it looks like this. I'll come from 27 again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and... I actually did not mean to hold that G, sorry. 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... One other tip I have for you, especially on these final chords, is if you could pick up with your wrist while still touching the keys and kind of pull backwards with the finger while dropping the wrist, you have a lot more control over the attack of this chord. It's easier to make them softer, and it's also easier to get the notes to sound at exactly the same time. So it's sort of softening towards the end of the piece. So once you have all of the components of the piece together, you can use a metronome, you can count using the quarter note instead of the eighth note, you can start assembling the different sections and end up with, a little bit brisker tempo, but that's still sweet sounding. And then you repeat that section while I go on. And that's basically it. I didn't talk too much about expression, and I can if you need me to, but I feel like the best way to spend your time on this tutorial is to show you how everything is choreographed, what the difficult parts are, and I think that a piece like this, when you're ready for it, can easily be learned in a couple of days to a week at the most. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you want to see more tutorials like this, definitely subscribe. If you like this tutorial, like the video. And if you have any questions or need something else covered, just leave a comment. Anyway, that's it for now. I will see you next time.